Thank you so much for being here tonight on this gorgeous evening. Very nice of you to set aside an hour or two to spend some time with us this evening. My name is Mallory Ahrens. I'm the head of adult programming here at Darien Library, and it's my great honor to welcome you here this evening. Before we get going, there's a couple groups I wanted to thank. The first is Barrett Bookstore for always being here at our author events. They are very much our literary partners in crime here in Darien, so thank you for being here this evening. The second is the Friends of the Library. If you're new to Darien Library, all of our events here, all of those cosmopolitans you're all enjoying, are because of donations. So thank you to the Friends of the Library for making programs like these possible for the community. Yeah, that's right. Tonight's guest is the best-selling author of Girls in White Dresses and The Smart One. Born and raised on the north side of Chicago, she is a graduate of Boston College and received her MFA in fiction writing from the New School. She worked in New York in magazines for many years. She now lives in Washington, D.C. and teaches creative writing at George Washington University. Please join me in welcoming to the library Jennifer Close.
Hi, you guys. Thank you for coming. I had an event last night, and I felt like I had to thank people for coming out. It was like the end of the world in that storm. But tonight, thank you for coming, because it is a beautiful night, so I'm happy that you're here. I'm just going to talk a little bit sort of about my inspiration for the book and how I started writing it. I don't know if anyone has read my first book, Girls in White Dresses, but it came out, I'm like, show of hands. I just put people on the spot. It came out 5 years ago, and I started writing it when I was living in New York, and there was just, I wanted to be a writer my whole life, and I, went to grad school, and I had all these dreams of what it would be like to publish a book. And I used to go to bookstores and libraries and look to see where my book would be on the shelf alphabetically, which I still look now because I just want to make sure they have it when it's there. But I just imagined what it would be like. And the one thing that I didn't imagine would happen was that when you write a fiction novel, everyone thinks it's about you. And so I wasn't ready for that. And I did write a book about a bunch of girls in their 20s in New York that were always going to weddings, which I was in my 20s in New York and always going to weddings. So there was a reason why I was inspired by it, and I kept, I felt really funny when people would say that to me, because they'd be like, well, which one are you? And like, where did this happen? And I was like sort of insulted, because I'd be like, I make things up. Like, I write fiction. But I realize I do it too, right? Like I love prep, and when I finally met Curtis Sittenfeld, all I could think was like, she didn't like prep school at all. Like, she had a really rough time. Even though I know how it works, I read Gone Girl, and I'm like still worried about Gillian Flynn's husband, always. So I know how it works. I know how you sort of think, this is based on real life. But I felt like the more that I tried to say like, no, this isn't me. This was inspired by this, but it's fiction, the more that it sounded like I was lying. My mother-in-law read it, and she was like, I didn't know you and your friends drank so much. And I was like, okay, thank you. Like, I don't know what to say. It was just like, I had no idea what to say. So after that came out, I sort of thought, I'm not going to write a book again that people think is my life. I think maybe I'll try something else. But then I moved to DC with my husband, he wasn't my husband at the time, who got a job working in the administration. And DC is a funny place. And I wasn't there long before I started thinking, I might have to write about this. And then the story sort of unfolded, and I started thinking like, it's gonna happen again. It's gonna happen again, but I can't ignore this story because I felt like I was fascinated. I'd never been in a place where everyone was so focused on the same thing. In New York, I worked in magazines, but I had friends who worked in finance or were teachers or, just all over the board, and in DC it felt really focused, and I really hated it at first. I didn't work in politics, so I felt like always a little left out of the conversation, and it wasn't until I made a bunch of friends that didn't work in politics there that I felt like I started to like the city. So I just sort of pushed writing this book off for a little while, and then started just writing things down, funny things that people did that were funny/annoying. They have a way of talking. They love talking about the president. There's this competition that happens of who has the best job and who's who's closest to the president. So I felt like that was the inspiration for it. And the other thing that I was really interested in was the idea of people who run for office, but more specifically their spouses and their partners. Because, and this is where I say my husband never wants to run for office, so it's not about me. But we did meet a couple of people early on, and Tim would say, he's going to run for office one day, or she's interested in running for office. And I just thought, that's such a hard job, and it's harder on the spouse. What if they don't want to do it? And that was where I started to get the idea for this character that married her husband really, really young. They get married in their early 20s, and they're together, and she kind of knows this is something he wants to do, but as it actually starts to happen, she sort of thinks, I never really thought this would happen. I thought that this was a dream that you had. I didn't know that we were really gonna do this. And I just, so that was sort of the tension first. And the other thing that I think when people say, what's this book about, is the idea of like political charisma, which is, I think everyone's thinking about it with this election. But it was also, in 2008, I think there was, between Hillary and Obama, I think there was sort of this feeling of, how important is it to be able to stand in front of someone and really mesmerize the audience. And so I wanted one of my characters to be just that person who has that magical thing that I think we've all seen someone who has it, right? That can talk and you can't take your eyes off of them, and they're so engaging and they can really get the idea across, and they may not always be the smartest person, but I think that takes them really far. So the two characters in my book, Jimmy is that person that has this charisma, and Matt is the one who's a little more serious and a little smarter, but he can't do that thing. And so their careers kind of start going in a different way. And I think it's fascinating and a little scary how far charisma can take you. There's just sort of that idea. So I was just going to read a little bit from the book. It's from the very beginning. You don't need to know anything. My narrator is Beth, who has moved to DC with her husband, and she hates it. I'll read a couple of parts. There's one part where she goes on a rant, which I will read later, that was, I think, probably the first few pages I wrote of the book, and I look back now and realize it was just my way of getting it out for all the things that I disliked. I really missed New York when I moved to DC. So this is what people talk about at an Obama campaign reunion. How early they joined the campaign, what they did on the campaign, who they slept with on the campaign, good hotels, bad hotels, how many Hilton points they have, how many frequent flyer miles they have, who worked for Hillary before joining Obama. This was whispered behind the backs of former Hillary staffers like it was a shameful secret, sort of like herpes. Inside jokes about lost luggage, how amazing Iowa was. Usually you'd hear someone say something like, weren't you in Iowa? Oh man, you should have been there. You missed out. It felt like we were changing the world. Then you'd brace yourself for about an hour's worth of Iowa stories. This never went over in DC laughed so hard at this that I felt like I was so funny. Then the next time I read, I was like, oh, it's not as funny as it is to these people. They have a very big point of pride of who is in Iowa, and they really talk about it a lot. So. We were at a bar near the White House called The Exchange, which had a lot of TVs and smelled like bleach and dirty rags. Matt ordered drinks for us at the bar, and then we walked around, stopping every few seconds so he could give someone a handshake or a half hug and say, hey man, how have you been? He was more hyper than usual. Being around the campaign people made him jumpy like he'd been chugging Red Bull. All that hope and change will do that to a person. Every time he introduced me to someone, he'd put his hand on my back and push me forward a little, saying, this is Beth, my wife. And when he'd tell me the name of the person I was meeting, he'd always include their job title. This is Larry, an associate research director at the White House. Each time I'd say something like, wow, that's great. I had no idea what any of it meant, but I did my best to look impressed. I will also say when I moved to DC, I was unemployed. So I had lost my job at the magazine, and it was really people in DC do ask you what you do. That's the first thing they ask you, what do you do? And I've never, I could just stop conversations by being like, I'm unemployed. And they would just, they were always like, oh, okay. And I'd be like, and I'm working on a book. And they were like, I'm gonna pretend I didn't ask you that. Eventually we found ourselves standing in a circle of people listening to this guy, Billy, tell a story about one of the early fundraising events. He was animated and everyone was hanging on his every word. So I was driving a center around Minnesota in a rental car, he said, a Ford Fiesta, I think. This was sometime in 2007, and we hit a pothole and almost lost a tire. Everyone laughed like this was really funny, so I did too, but it gave me a kind of creepy feeling. Billy was telling this story like it was about potholes or Ford Fiestas, but it wasn't. The real points of the story were, 1. Billy knew Obama when he was a senator, and he knew him so well that sometimes he just forgot that he was the president now and still referred to him as the senator. Such a simple mistake. 2. He joined the campaign so early that there weren't even drivers yet, which means that Billy drove around Minnesota with Obama in shotgun. How crazy is that? How jealous are you? 3. And again, just to repeat it, he joined the campaign early, so early, earlier than everyone else, before you definitely. He always knew Obama would be the nominee. Possibly, he was the first person in the world to know. As everyone laughed at the hilarious Ford Fiesta story, Matt put his hand on my back and I braced myself to be introduced to someone else. But he just leaned down and whispered, "We can go soon, okay?" I nodded and tried to look like I was having fun, like I loved being at this reunion. Which, by the way, was a really weird thing to call it, a reunion, because all of these people lived in DC, and most of them worked together. If they wanted to reunite, they could do it over lunch or coffee, or running into each other in the hallway. And so I just shrugged and said to Matt, "Sure, we can go whenever you want." Matt smiled at me like he knew I was lying, which I appreciated. I was making an effort to be positive about moving to DC, but these people didn't make it easy. Everyone at that happy hour seemed just a little off in a way I couldn't put my finger on. When I mentioned this to Matt, he said, "It's all people who work in politics. Nature of the beast, I guess." But as we stood there that night listening to another story about Iowa, I had a realization. All of the people there reminded me of high school student council members, the ones who fought for pizza lunches and dance themes with great passion. They were all so eager and borderline annoying. Was Matt one of them? Had I never noticed? Had he always been this way or just become one of them when I wasn't paying attention? So it is funny. This sort of inspiration, the people that worked on the campaign, I will say they had this like very tight bond, and I always felt like I was on the outside of it. When I first started writing this book, I started writing it in third person. I haven't written in first person in a while, and as I wrote more, I started to think, I think it has to be from first person, and I think it has to be from someone from the outside so that she can explain this world to the reader. And part of it was really fun. She's like a little sarcastic, as you can tell, but sometimes she would be so negative that I would be writing her voice and I'd be like, "Come on, lighten up." But I mean, I don't mean to insult her. I do like her very much. But, so I'm just going to read a little part of when they actually find the apartment that they're living in DC. "We found a place just north of DuPont Circle, on a tiny block with 5 townhouses, diagonally across the street from a Hilton. The day we'd gone to look at the apartment, Matt had pointed at the hotel. 'Do you know what that is?' he asked. 'What, the hotel?' 'Yeah, that right there. Look at the doorway. Does it look familiar?' 'No,' I said. 'Not at all. Just look at it for a minute.' Matt was always doing this, always insisting that I knew things I didn't. Once when we were on opposite teams during a Trivial Pursuit game with friends, he refused to let me pass on the question, who once warned, never eat more than you can lift. I didn't even have a guess, but Matt wouldn't let it go. 'Come on, Beth, you know this,' he kept saying, as our friends sat there and I got embarrassed and then mad. 'I don't know,' I kept insisting. The answer was Miss Piggy. To this day, I have no idea why Matt was sure I knew the answer, but it still remains one of the biggest fights we've ever had. We didn't play Trivial Pursuit for years after that. Standing in front of the apartment that day, I didn't have the patience to play Matt's games and guess what was so special about the hotel. 'Just tell me,' I said. 'It's where Reagan was shot,' he said. 'It's the Hinckley Hilton. Look, that's where he was coming out of the hotel, and right there is where he got shot. Crazy, right?' 'Crazy,' I said. I was tired of walking around and looking at apartments, and knew that my attitude was putting a sourness over the whole afternoon. Matt was just trying to lighten the mood, but it was a little weird to try to cheer me up by showing me the spot of an attempted presidential assassination, wasn't it? Although I soon found myself pointing out to everyone who came to visit. When a friend from college who lived in Brooklyn told me that Sesame Street was filming on her block, I quickly came back with, "From our front door, you can see where Reagan was shot." When we signed the lease, the broker took notice of Matt's jacket, a fleece with an Obama-Biden logo embroidered on the chest. These jackets were given to the staff on election night, and you saw people wearing them all over town, like badges of honor. "Did you work on the campaign?" the broker asked, and Matt nodded. "It's so great he won," the broker said. "It really is," Matt agreed. "I mean, for business, it's great," the broker said. "All the real estate agents here are thrilled. We'll be renting so many more places. Republicans don't live in the district, you know, they live in Virginia." He said this like it was a fact everyone knew. "Isn't that weird?" I said to Matt later. "Not really," he shrugged. It's like anything else divided down party lines. Republicans like Fox News, and NASCARs and Democrats like MSNBC and Starbucks. Simple as that, I asked, and he said, absolutely. I will say when I started this, there was something about DC that I wanted to capture, and I think part of what makes it such a weird place is how no one's staying there, right? Like, even from the minute they get there, there's a feeling of like they're about to wash out in 4 or 8 years, maybe sooner. And it was such a strange place to move to after New York, where the neighborhoods just have so much personality. And to move to a place that didn't, DC felt like a little bit behind the times. They didn't have as many restaurants. You know, it felt like people weren't living there. And it has changed a little bit since I've gotten there, but it was, I think it's hard to move anywhere from New York, but it was just like I was sort of taken aback that like, this is our capital. But no one stays there. So it's not the same sort of, you don't have the neighborhoods that are established. And it'll be interesting to see. I talked a little bit at this radio show just sort of about what it will be like when the administration changes over, regardless of who it is, because I just feel like there's going to be moving vans fighting for space on the street. You know, it's just going to be an exodus, it's strange. It's a very strange place. So I'm going to read the rant that I talked about, which was one of the first things I wrote for this book. And this is just Beth telling you why she does not like DC. I hated everything about DC. I hated the weather in the summer, how it was so humid you could barely breathe, how you started sweating as soon as you walked out the door. I hated the way people asked, who do you work for, as soon as you met them, like that was the only thing that mattered. I hated the shorthand people used to talk about their jobs. I work at Treasury, they'd say, or at DOD, or for POTUS, or I'm in LA. It was like they didn't have enough time to say the whole thing. Like if you didn't know what their acronym meant, you didn't matter anyway. I also hated how it wasn't long before I used these acronyms, how they so quickly became a part of my vocabulary. I hated that the metro was carpeted and that it was so far underground. You felt like a mole by the time you got down there. And I hated that you had to swipe your card to get in and out of the station. I do still hate that. It makes no sense. It's so frustrating. It's just like, I don't know who designed it that way, but it just seems like a really poorly planned system. I hated that you couldn't eat or drink on the train, and I especially hated that everyone obeyed the rule, like they were afraid they'd be arrested for sipping a cup of Starbucks on their morning commute. I hated the helicopters that buzzed overhead, like we were in some sort of war zone. I hated how the motorcades stopped traffic, halted the metros, and clogged up the streets, usually when you were running late to get somewhere. I hated how young everyone was, especially on the Hill, how they walked around all doughy and baby-faced, wearing suits that their mothers had bought them, thrilled with the fact that they'd accepted a salary of $23,000 to work for 10 hours a day. I hated that they were all so eager, ready to tell you about their passion, healthcare or Planned Parenthood or clean water, whether you asked or not. I hated the way people dressed in collared shirts and knee-length skirts, muted suits and sensible ties. I hated that all the women looked like they'd just left an Ann Taylor store, and I hated that most likely they probably just had. I hated that so many women wore sneakers and socks with their suits while they commuted, as if it was still 1987. I wanted to pull them aside and tell them that there was no need for this, that there were very comfortable ballet flats out there they could wear instead. I hated the way that everyone wore their ID cards around their necks and tucked into their front suit jacket pockets so that the only thing visible were the lanyards, just so they could let you know that they were very important people who worked at very important places. I hated how the cabs were always dirty, how they only took cash, and how the drivers never seemed to know where they were going. I hated that you couldn't order takeout past 10 o'clock unless you wanted pizza from a questionable place. I hated that I had to drive to get decent groceries, that there weren't any good neighborhood stores. I missed our neighborhood bodega. I missed it every day. That night, I ate my grilled cheese and told Matt all the things I hated about DC. I wanted him to understand how I felt, but he just told me it was impossible to hate that many things. It's not impossible, I told him. It's hard, and it takes a lot of energy, but it's not impossible. This is why I got a little tired of her at the end. Matt looked at me like he wasn't sure what to say. He rubbed my leg. Do you want some more wine, he asked, and I nodded. He got up to fill my glass, and I pulled a blanket off the back of the couch and covered myself with it, curled my legs underneath me, suddenly tired. When he handed me my wine, he leaned down to kiss me. Maybe, he said, if you try to hate it here a little less, you eventually will. I doubt it, I said, but maybe you could try it. I could, I said, but I didn't say that I would. That's good. I think maybe I'll just let you guys ask questions and see if there's anything that you want to talk about. I can talk about a lot of different things, but maybe it's nice to hear if you're curious about any part of the book or writing it or the publishing process. I don't mean to put you guys on the spot.
How long did it take you to write the book?
I started this, it's funny, I don't know if any of you know the website 5 Chapters. It's this website where they publish like a fifth of a short story every day of the week. And I went back and I almost didn't realize that I had done this, but my book came out in August of 2011, Girls in White Dresses, and they asked me to write a short story, and it was these characters. They have different names, which then I was like, that is a long time to be writing a book. I wasn't focusing on it full time because I was finishing my second book, The Smart One, and I also didn't know what was going to happen for a long time. So I guess I could say 5 years, but I think maybe there was almost 3 years of like really intense writing, and it changed a lot. I had like 200 pages that I threw out. I had all this stuff about the narrator's childhood, which I loved, but my editor was right to tell me to get rid of it because it didn't make any sense to start when she was in grade school, but there was just some really great scenes I had written that I loved. So probably 3 years of like super intense writing and then another year of editing. And then it takes a long time once you finish it for it to actually come out. This one was like rushed a little bit, and because I took so long to finish it, that at one point then they were like, oh, it's kind of good timing if it comes out right before the election. So this was like probably 8 months until I had the book in my hand from when I finished it, 7 or 8 months. So yeah, it's a long answer, but.
What do you like about DC personally?
Oh, I like a lot of things about it now. It was, the biggest thing is I think when you leave New York, all of a sudden you think, but this is how other people live. You get a washer and dryer, and there's a point in the book where you forget that you just get so used to living in Manhattan and thinking like, this is normal. It's normal to pay like so much money for this apartment. So that is a really nice thing once you sort of do that. It's much quieter. It feels less, those, when you're in a city and you just feel like you have to get out. I don't often have that with DC because it's much more spread out. There's a lot of green space, and it's even where we live, it feels almost like a suburb. So I like that, and it's just a little bit easier. And I actually do now appreciate in a way I didn't when I first got there, just sort of the personality of the city. Because it is, I think maybe part of it is now that it's sort of ending. My husband works at the White House, so he will not be working there soon when it changes. And I think once something ends and you think like, there's really neat parts about that the motorcades are annoying, but you sort of get used to the fact that like, oh, that's the president that's driving down the street, or when you see the helicopters, you sort of start to take it for granted all these like really neat things, or that you walk by the White House, So I think it's a special place. There's a lot that I like about it now, but my apartment is a really big part of that.
So now people ask you, what do you do? What do you say?
Do you know what is funny? So I teach at GW too, which I really like, and depending on, there's two things. One, there's something that when I say I'm a writer, I don't know when it's going to happen, but like I haven't fully realized that I actually am a writer. So I feel like almost embarrassed, like I'm bragging or something. I don't know why. And so there's that part of it. And then people also say like, have I read anything you've written? Which is a really weird thing. So I'm like, I don't know what you read. So, and almost never it's very rare that they have. Sometimes they have, but then I try to say like, oh, but it was a real book. It's published by Knopf. Like it's this weird thing. So I do say I'm a writer, but sometimes if I maybe just don't want to talk about it, or I know they're not going to know anything about like the fiction world, I say that I teach at GW. But it comes up anyway, because then they say, what do you teach? And I say fiction writing. And then they kind of look at me like, so why do you teach? So are you a writer? So I do say I'm a writer. Yeah.
But as a fiction writer, you have to do so much other research too, to make sure things are what go well.
Yeah.
The streets, the this, the that.
This book was so I did so much more research for this book than I did for my other two books, and I realized, someone asked me if I was going to keep writing. They were like, are you going to keep writing about this couple and what happened? And I was like, I don't think so.
Right.
Because to even get their career paths right, I had to talk to so many people to just say, would this even make sense? And I didn't need it to be completely, believable, but plausible, right? And there's, I don't want to give it away, but there is a campaign at the end, and this man who was like an angel, because he just answered my email, he had run for this office, and he shared everything it was so helpful. Yeah, he was so, I think I would have had to change what happened in the book if he hadn't been so willing to help me, because it was really hard to even, they're in Texas, so it's like they're driving around, and I would have to say, like, would you go to this town and would you stay overnight? And how many people would be at the event? Because you want to make sure you get it right. And there is, I will say, something that I knew was wrong in here, but I just made the decision. They have a fact checker read it, but it was they're watching one of the debates, and I have them talk about two different things that happened in two different debates. And my husband actually is the one that caught it. And I looked at him and I was like, well, my choice is to write another scene where they're watching a debate, which sounds so boring, right? Like I wanted to get both of these lines in, and I was like, so I'm just gonna keep it because it's fiction, and I think that's okay, and I won't mind if people notice it. And then I feel like I'm like guilty because I keep telling everyone, I'm like, there's a mistake in there and I do know about it. Like I wanna, tell on myself before they find it. But yeah, at a certain point, the career paths of Matt and Jimmy probably haven't happened like that. And I was okay with, it was just, I needed it to be plausible, but I was very okay with the fact that this is fiction and it's a novel, and I just, I had to be comfortable with that a little bit. But I did do a lot of research. And one funny thing that I do, I don't know if it's funny or lazy, but I always have my characters live where I live, because I don't want to get the neighborhood wrong. So I have them live in DuPont, which is where I live, because it seems silly to me to have them live in Logan Circle just to have them live somewhere else and then get one of the restaurants wrong, or get sort of the walking wrong. And one of my favorite stories, so my first book, Girls in White Dresses, there's just one chapter that takes place in Chicago, and the characters are visiting their girlfriends and they stay in this apartment. And I perfectly describe the apartment where I lived right after college. And it's very clear, it's above a bar, so I say the name of the bar, it's, in Lincoln Park in Chicago. And I described the apartment, which was this weird old apartment that had a lofted bed. And one of my students at GW went to go visit her friends at DePaul, and she said, oh, they were talking about your book. And I said, that's my writing teacher. And they said, we live in her old apartment. And we know, because they read my book and they recognized it. And then they took out the pages in the book that described the apartment and hung it on their walls. And isn't that the sweet? I felt it was like the happiest, like one of my happiest writer moments that, but yeah, I do, when I describe where they live, when my husband read that part, he was like, do you not want to put them on a different block? And it was like, no, because I want to talk about how we can see the place where Reagan was shot. That's a weird DC thing, and I like that. And location I think is important, and I think when you read a book, I love reading about neighborhoods, and when you read a book, you want to feel like it's true, and there's nothing worse than catching a mistake or having someone, that being said, the part that takes place in Texas, I was really worried about it, because I wanted to make sure that I did this place justice and that I explained it in the right way. So I did a lot of, the internet is great. I was saying yesterday, I was like, I feel like there's an alert out for the people of Sugar Land, Texas, on how much I was on their Google Maps just looking around their neighborhoods. But I wanted to make sure that I was getting it right. Yeah, and it's hard. So.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Mm-hmm.
What do you tell your fiction writing students? What's some advice you give them?
I love this question, and it's not a super exciting answer, but I really try to drive home just how hard it is to write. Not how hard it is to actually write, but how much, if you want to do this, because a lot of them come into the class and really want to be writers, just sort of that you have to put the time in, because when I was younger, I started writing a book in high school, which I did throw out because it was mortifying. It was the worst thing I've ever read. Everyone was like, you shouldn't throw anything out. I'm like, this one I don't want anyone to find. But I started writing it, and I would get to a place every time I started a project where I felt like I didn't know how to go on, or I'd read a sentence and think, this is so bad that maybe I'm not supposed to be a writer. And I really thought when I was younger that writers started on page 1 just typed away and ended at the end of the book. I had no idea sort of what went into it. So we talk a lot just about how you have to sort of put the time in. I have them read the book Bird by Anne Lamott, which is so, I don't know if anyone's read it, but it's so good. And it talks about writing and just sort of how, like, a lot of it is just showing up and sitting there and really practicing. Like, it's like exercising or, you know, doing anything else that requires practice is just getting better. And I want them to know that just so they don't get frustrated and sort of think like, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to do this. Because that was when I read Bird by Bird, and she talks about, you know, writing horrible first drafts. I thought, oh, you can go back and fix them, which never, it's like it didn't occur to me. I just thought, when I would write a sentence that was so bad, I would think like, I'm just gonna give up. So that's a lot of what we focus on.
Well, you did.
Yeah, I did. Thanks.
Do you live in Connecticut now?
No, I'm still in DC.
Oh, you are? Okay, I was curious how you felt about Connecticut versus Washington, D.C.
Oh, well, this library is so pretty. Yeah. Yeah, Connecticut to me seems a little bit like, it's like in the New York, in the New York area, and I went to school in cities are so interesting with their personalities, but no, Connecticut's lovely. On the drive out here, it was nice to get out of the city.
I can't believe you're still in Washington.
Yeah, I know, and I shouldn't have ever said, when we first moved there, I was like, we'll be here 2 years tops, which everyone always likes to remind me of, and they're like, so you were wrong. Yeah, because I've been there for about 6 years. Yeah, it's a long time.
But that's so true about the humidity there, because I went there driving through in August.
It's so bad.
Like even in the gorgeous hotel we were in, it was
You're so hot all the time. Yeah,
in the taxi, forget about it.
I know. It's a very
It's like, don't you guys have air conditioning?
You do, but it doesn't matter. It's almost like, I feel like sometimes it's like Florida a little bit, where, because they're like, oh, but our spring and our fall is so nice. And I want to be like, yeah, but you can't go outside in the summer. So that just, Chicago I'm from Chicago, and it's cold there, but the summers are beautiful. Like you get to actually appreciate it. In DC, that's it. You're in air conditioning. So yeah, I'm still not used to that. Sure.
How hard was your first editing process? Like when someone would tell you what works and doesn't work?
Oh, I like that question. I was talking to another writer today, and there's a couple things. One, like I've sort of learned my reactions to things and like how my emotions play a role, because my editor, who I adore, and I've been with her for all 3 books, and she's so smart. She'll suggest something to me, and I'll get very offended. Like when she was like, I don't think we need Beth's middle school, a whole chapter on that, and I was like, well, you're wrong, and that's stupid, and you're not writing this book. And then I sit with it for a day, and I think, yeah, she might be. It's very rare. You stop seeing what you're writing. You're too close to it. So I always know to like let it sink in, because when she reads a draft, she'll write an edit letter, and it's like pages and pages of. You're so close to it that it sort of feels like someone's insulting you. Like, it's in another thing on page 73. Like, this paragraph doesn't make sense, and you're like, well,
It sounds bad.
no, she is really nice. She says it in a very nice way. But she catches these things that I don't see anymore, and I've learned just to sort of read it, let it sink in, read it again. And I was talking about this with another writer today who said, I thought she was wrong. I was so annoyed at her edits, and she was so right. And I've done everything that she said, and it makes it a better book. There was a lot. It just makes it. When I worked in magazines, and I think that helped so much, because I got to see sort of the way that writers can't like let their own writing go. Like I watched like a grown man almost cry when we told him he had to cut 500 words, and he was like, I can't. There's no way. He flipped out, and I was like, there's always a way. You can always cut it. And you can always make it better. And I think it's good to remember there's a reason there's editors, and there's a reason it's someone else that's reading it, because you're just too close to it, So it's a work in progress, but I like being edited. I know that it makes it a better book with each thing that I do for it. So yeah. So is that, that's it? Okay, good. Thank you guys very much. It's a good conversation.